Last year, my roommate and I had this stupid fun routine. We lived in a split-level house in the city that had been chopped up into 4 separate apartments. We were the only ones on the first floor. The main front door to the building didn't even have a lock. It just stayed open so people could get to the mailboxes or head up the main stairs or down the spiral ones to the basement units. Because of that, we'd installed a Ring doorbell right outside our actual apartment door for a little extra peace of mind. Since we both loved fashion, we started doing these outfit checks. Every morning before we left, we'd hit the doorbell, stand in front of the camera, and do a little 360-degree spin to show off what we were wearing. It was a joke between us, just a way to keep a log of our favorite looks. We did this every single day for months. By the time mid-December rolled around, I decided I had enough clips to put together a year in outfits video for TikTok. I sat down on my bed around 6:20 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday, opened the Ring app, and started scrolling back through months of history to download the best spins. That's when I saw the missed rings. The first one was from late October. It wasn't me, and it wasn't my roommate. It was a guy I'd never seen before. He was standing right outside our door. I felt a weird pit form in my stomach, so I started clicking on every recording that didn't have one of us in the thumbnail. It was a nightmare. There were dozens of clips. The pattern was the same almost every time. I'd come home from class around 4:15 p.m., unlock my door, and go inside. Not even 60 seconds later, the camera would trigger. This guy would come through the main unlocked building door, walk straight to my apartment, and just stand there. He'd idle at the door for 5-10 minutes at a time. Sometimes he would pretend to cry, wiping his eyes and leaning his head against the wood. Other times he'd hide his face in his hands, then look visibly frustrated or angry before finally turning around and leaving. I watched one clip where I had clearly forgotten to double lock the deadbolt, and I saw him reach out and slowly, tentatively, turn the handle. It didn't open because the latch caught, but seeing him try to enter while I was probably 10 feet away in the kitchen making tea, I've never felt fear like that. It was physical. It felt like my blood had turned into liquid lead. I stopped doing everything. I wouldn't walk to the store at 5:30 p.m. I wouldn't go to the gym. I wouldn't even take the trash out to the curb unless my roommate was standing in the hallway watching me. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I live in a big city. Maybe he was just someone struggling with his mental health who thought this was his old apartment. Or maybe he just liked my dogs. I tried every excuse to make it feel less like a target was painted on my back. I eventually went to Reddit to see if anyone had advice. I titled it something like, "I think I have a stalker," and I posted 3 of the videos. That post blew up, and it changed everything. The comments were a brutal reality check. People pointed out things I hadn't even noticed because I was too busy looking at his face. In 2 of the 3 videos I had posted, the man was completely naked from the waist down. He was standing in our common hallway, right outside my bedroom wall, exposed. I was mortified. The embarrassment felt almost as bad as the fear. I stopped having people over. I felt like my home was a crime scene that hadn't happened yet. My friends were messaging me, asking if I was okay, but then I got one notification that made my heart stop. It was a DM from a brand new account. It said, "Please delete your post. I am not a stalker." I stared at the screen for 10 minutes. The audacity was what got me. He was watching the post. He saw himself being discussed, and his first instinct wasn't to run or hide. It was to gaslight me into thinking I was the one doing something wrong. I went to the profile. There were no posts, except for one video he'd uploaded to a soccer subreddit a few days prior. It was a screen recording of a game, but he had his microphone on. Hearing his voice for the first time, this calm, normal-sounding guy talking about a sports play made me feel sick. I screenshotted everything and took it to the campus police. They were sympathetic, but they told me the same thing everyone hears. Since he hadn't actually touched me or broken in yet, and since I didn't know his name, there wasn't much they could do besides keep an eye out. Fast forward to July. I had survived the semester, and I was finally moving out. I was moving back in with my mom in a completely different neighborhood, miles away. July 1st was the happiest day of my life. I was literally skipping around the new house, carrying boxes, feeling the weight finally lift off my shoulders. I was free. He didn't know where I was. On July 2nd, around 10:30 a.m., I was out walking my dogs. It was a beautiful, sunny morning. As I rounded the corner to head back to my mom's place, I saw a guy walking toward me on the opposite side of the sidewalk. My brain did a double take. Something about his gait, the way he held his shoulders, it was familiar. As we passed each other, he turned his head. He looked me dead in the eyes and gave me this slow, knowing smile. It was him. I stopped in my tracks. The world felt like it was tilting. He had found me. I don't know if he followed the moving truck or if he'd been tracking me some other way, but he was there, in broad daylight, at my new front door. I didn't feel scared in that moment. I felt pure, vibrating rage. I looked at the friend who was walking with me, and I yelled, loud enough for the whole block to hear, "That's the guy! That's the guy who was naked at my door! That's the guy from Reddit!" He didn't even flinch. He didn't speed up. He just kept walking with that same smug expression. I turned around and screamed at his back, "If I ever see you on this street again, I will ruin you. I'm calling the cops right now." He just kept strolling. The police couldn't find him that day, but on July 5th, my roommates, who had helped me move, saw a car parked across the street. He was sitting in the driver's seat at 2:15 p.m., just staring at our front porch. They took a photo of his license plate and called the cops. This time, they caught him. They told him to stay away and issued an emergency protection order. It didn't matter. He was back the next morning. He was arrested, bonded out within hours, and was back sitting on the curb by 8 p.m. the same day. It turned into a legal circus. They issued a warrant for felony stalking and violating the protection order. He skipped the court hearing, which put him in contempt and eventually tracked him down. He's sitting in a cell right now, waiting for our court date next week. Even knowing he's behind bars, I still find myself checking the Ring app every time the wind blows a leaf past the sensor. I don't do outfit checks anymore. I don't stand in front of the camera. I just check the locks, over and over.
I moved into a small, single-story rental in a quiet suburb of Ohio about 6 months ago. The neighborhood is the kind where people take their lawns way too seriously, and the biggest drama is usually a barking dog. My house shares a back fence with a guy named Jerry. He's in his late 60s, retired, and always seemed like a standard, harmless hobbyist. He's constantly out in his yard building things, birdhouses, trellises, planters. I'm a designer, so I work from home. My office is just a desk pushed up against the window in my bedroom that looks out over the backyard. Around evening every day, as the sun starts to dip, Jerry is out there in his woodworking shed. The shed is positioned right against our shared fence line, and it has a small second-story loft area he uses for storage. A few weeks ago, I noticed Jerry was working on a new project. It was a massive birdhouse, way bigger than the others, maybe 3 feet tall. He didn't put it on a post in the garden. He mounted it to the very peak of his shed's roof, right at the edge of the property line. From my desk, that birdhouse felt like it was staring at me. The entry hole for the birds was perfectly aligned with my bedroom window. I laughed it off at first. telling my sister it was just Jerry's masterpiece. Then I noticed the schedule. Jerry wasn't working on his other projects anymore. Every evening at 6:45 p.m., he'd climb the ladder into his shed loft. I'd see the dim yellow light of his lantern through the loft window. He'd stay up there for 3 or 4 hours, and he wouldn't come down until I turned off my bedroom lights and went to the kitchen for dinner. Last Tuesday, I decided to test a theory. I sat at my desk at 7 p.m., but I didn't turn on my computer. I kept the room dark and cracked the window just an inch. The neighborhood was quiet, just the sound of a distant lawnmower. Then I heard the rhythmic creak thud of Jerry's ladder. A minute later, I heard a faint, mechanical whirring sound coming from the birdhouse. It wasn't a bird. It was the sound of a high-end camera lens zooming. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. I didn't call out. I didn't make a sound. I just sat there in the dark, watching that black hole in the birdhouse. I could see a faint, bluish glow coming from inside the hole, the reflection of a small LCD screen. The next morning, I waited until I saw Jerry's truck pull out of his driveway to go to the hardware store. I grabbed a ladder from my garage and hauled it to the back fence. I climbed up and leaned over his shed roof. The birdhouse wasn't a birdhouse. It was a hollowed-out wooden shell bolted to the shingles. I reached inside the entry hole, and my hand hit something cold and metallic. I pulled it out. It was a professional-grade DSLR camera rigged to a long-range power bank and a Wi-Fi transmitter. It was mounted on a motorized swivel base. I checked the screen on the back of the camera. The memory card was full. There were thousands of photos. They weren't just of me at my desk. There were photos of me sleeping, photos of me changing, photos of me just sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through my phone. He had used a thermal filter for some of them, so he could see me even when the curtains were drawn. The most unsettling part wasn't the photos, though. It was a small, handwritten notebook tucked into the bottom of the wooden shell. I opened it. It was a log. October 12th, 7:12 p.m. She's wearing the blue sweater today. Coffee at 8:05 p.m. October 15th, 11:30 p.m. Light is still on. She's reading. Page 42 of the Red Book. November 2nd, 6:45 p.m. She looked at the birdhouse. I think she likes it. I took the camera and the notebook. I didn't call the police right away because I wanted to see what he'd do when he realized the bird was gone. I went back into my house and waited. At 6:45 p.m. sharp, I heard the ladder. I stood by my window, hidden behind the curtain. I watched the shed loft. The yellow light came on. I waited for 2 minutes. Then the light in the loft flickered and went out. I heard the ladder again, but this time it wasn't a slow creak thud. It was the sound of someone scrambling down in a panic. I walked out my back door and stood in the middle of my yard. Jerry was standing on his side of the fence, his face pale and sweating under the porch light. He looked at me. Then his eyes darted to the top of the shed where the empty wooden shell sat. I didn't say a word. I just held up the camera in one hand and the notebook in the other. Jerry didn't apologize. He didn't try to explain it away as a hobby. He just stared at the notebook, his mouth twitching. "I have the footage from the night you installed the base," I said. It was a lie, but it worked. He took a step back, turned around, and went into his house. He didn't come out for 3 days. On the 4th day, a for sale sign appeared in his front yard. A moving truck showed up 48 hours after that. I watched from my window as the movers hauled out his woodworking benches and his crates of birdhouses. Jerry never looked at my house once. He kept his head down, got into his truck, and drove away without even waiting for the movers to finish. The house next door is empty now. I still have the camera and the notebook in a box in my garage. The wooden shell is still there too. It's bolted to the roof, staring back at my window. Sometimes, when I'm sitting at my desk, I find myself looking at the top close-up of that empty shed, wondering what would have happened if I had not decided to test my theory about the birdhouse. I'm lucky enough to live in a part of the country where people actually move to for the scenery. There are these long, winding trails through the woods and open fields that stay busy all year round with dog walkers and families. It's the kind of place where you never think about locking your door during the day. It just feels safe. About a year ago, that feeling vanished. I don't really have a set routine, but I try to get out for a walk most days just to clear my head. It was a Saturday morning, one of those perfectly clear days where the paths are packed. I was finishing up my loop and heading back toward my street. I noticed a guy walking maybe 30 yards behind me, but I didn't think anything of it. These paths are public. Everyone heads back to the residential area at some point. When I got inside my house, I went to the mudroom to take off my shoes. There's a window there that gives you a clear view of the front walkway and the kitchen. As I was unlacing my sneakers, I saw him. He was standing right in my flower bed, his face pressed against the kitchen window. He wasn't just glancing in, he was staring, his eyes moving back and forth like he was memorizing the layout of the room. He stayed there for a long beat, then stepped back and walked to the front door. He knocked. It wasn't a polite tap. It was heavy and insistent. I stood in the hallway, frozen. I never open the door for people I don't know, especially when they were just peeping through my windows. I planned on just waiting him out, but then he shouted through the door, "I saw you get home!" His voice was loud and flat. I felt a cold chill hit my stomach. I realized he knew I was standing right there, so I opened the door just a crack, keeping my foot wedged behind it so it couldn't be pushed further. The guy was massive. He was at least 6 feet 3 inches, built heavy, and he had this intense, vibrating energy about him that made my skin crawl. He was holding a large cardboard box for a slow cooker. "I followed you home from the trailhead," he said. "No, hello, no excuse about being lost." He just admitted it. He started this weird, rambling story about how his mother used to live in the house next door, and he wanted to know how long I'd been living there. I told him he should ask my neighbors on the other side, since they'd lived here for 50 years. He looked, his face tightening up. Then he changed his tone. He started asking if he could come in for a cup of tea. He kept saying he was so very lonely and just wanted a friend. I told him no, firmly, and shut the door. I locked it and stayed in the hallway until I heard his footsteps fade away. I didn't go out alone for 2 weeks after that. I kept watching the street, but I never saw him, so eventually I convinced myself it was a one-time thing. I went back to my trails. The first day I went out, I saw a bike leaning against a tree near the creek. Then I heard tires on the gravel. He rode up and started cycling in a big slow circle around me. He did it 3 times, never taking his eyes off me. I didn't run. I just stared him down with every bit of anger I had until he finally pedaled off. After that, he was everywhere. I'd be walking back from the corner shop and he'd pop up out of an alleyway or from behind a parked car. "Hi, Sarah," he said one evening. "It's a nice night, isn't it?" He used my legal name. I have no idea how he got it. We don't have mutual friends, and it's not on my mail. He started appearing on every single path I used, no matter how far out I went. A few months ago, I hit my breaking point. It was a Tuesday in the dead of winter. It was already pitch black by 5:30 p.m., but I had a long week and desperately needed the air. My gut was screaming at me to stay inside. I felt this heavy, oily sense of dread before I even put my coat on. I ignored it. I told myself I was being paranoid and that I couldn't let some creep ruin my life. I went to the shop and took the short loop back. It's a beautiful path, but it's the darkest one in the neighborhood. As I reached the center of the woods, I saw a single, bobbing light coming toward me. It was a bike light. I've dealt with aggressive guys before. I've had people try to pull things in bars, and I've always been the one to square up and make them back off. But as this light got closer, I felt my legs go weak. He slowed down until he was riding right next to me, matching my walking pace in the dark. "I saw you taking your trash out Monday night," he whispered. "You have 2 dogs, don't you? And the cat. They're nice." He started listing off my address, my pets, and details about my life he couldn't have known unless he'd been standing in my yard in the dark. He kept pushing for that cup of tea. He was practically begging me to be his friend, his voice getting higher and more. I told him my husband was expecting me, and I had to go. He stopped pedaling for a second and laughed. "You don't have a husband. I've watched the house. You're always by yourself." I didn't answer. I just walked as fast as I could until I hit the streetlights. He eventually veered off into the trees, shouting something about me being ungrateful. I ran home and told my husband everything. He's a big guy, 6 feet 2 inches, and looks like he's lived in a boxing gym. He was stunned, mostly because he's seen me handle myself in bad situations, and he'd never seen me this shaken. We agreed I wasn't going anywhere alone. Last week, we were sitting on a park bench together, just watching the sunset. The paths were crowded with families. Suddenly, I felt that familiar cold prickle on my neck. I looked over. He was standing about 20 feet away, leaning against his bike. He didn't move. He didn't wave. He just stood there and stared at the two of us for 5 straight minutes. My husband saw him. He went totally still, his jaw setting. He's the kind of man who would end a fight in 10 seconds, but even he didn't move. The silence between us and that man was the most unsettling thing I've ever felt. After a long time, the guy slowly climbed onto his bike and rode off into the shadows. My husband turned to me, and I could see the actual unease in his eyes. "Okay," he said. "I get it now. Those vibes. That guy is dangerous. I haven't been out by myself since. The police told us there's nothing they can do because he's just a lonely guy and hasn't technically threatened me. So now I just stay in and watch the people on the paths from my window, and every time I see a bike light in the distance, I run to the door to check the locks on the front door." I've been working at this logistics firm for about 6 years. It's a standard corporate office. Lots of glass, gray carpets, and a badge-in system that's supposed to keep people out. My desk is right across from my supervisor, a guy I'll call Jensen. He's a solid guy, mid-40s, divorced, and usually the most level-headed person in the building. He's the kind of boss who actually remembers your birthday and doesn't micromanage. The trouble started on a Tuesday afternoon around 4 p.m. I was heading to the break room to grab a sparkling water when I saw a woman standing by the elevators. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. She was wearing a high-visibility vest over a hoodie, holding a clipboard like she was there to check the fire extinguishers. I didn't think twice about it. When I got back to my desk, Jensen was staring at a small, gift-wrapped box sitting on his keyboard. He looked pale. "Who left this?" he asked. He wasn't smiling. I told him I hadn't seen anyone come by. He opened the box. Inside was a single used tea bag in a plastic baggie and a handwritten note that just said, "I remember how you like it. 4 minutes, exactly." Jensen didn't say anything. He just dropped the box into his trash can and walked toward HR. Later that evening, after the office had mostly emptied out, he told me the history. About 3 years ago, a woman named Renee worked in the billing department. Jensen had helped her out with some software training when she first started. He said she was quiet, but efficient. Then, she started leaving things for him. A coffee on his desk, a sandwich, a tie she thought would look good on him. Jensen eventually sat her down and told her it was unprofessional and that he wasn't interested in anything beyond a working relationship. She didn't take it well. She quit the next day without notice. He figured that was the end of it. Then, about a month ago, she found his personal cell number. She started sending him photos of his own house. Not from the street, photos taken from his backyard, looking through the sliding glass door while he was watching TV. He'd already filed a police report and changed his locks, but the cops told him that since she hadn't made an explicit threat, their hands were mostly tied. "That woman by the elevators today," I said, the realization hitting me. "She was wearing a vest. She looked like maintenance." Jensen's face went tight. We went to the security desk and asked to see the footage from 4 p.m. We watched the screen as the woman in the yellow vest walked out of the service stairwell, walked directly to Jensen's desk while I was in the break room, placed the box on his keyboard, and then stood there. She didn't leave immediately. She stood over his empty chair for nearly 3 minutes. In the grainy security footage, you could see her leaning down, putting her face close to the headrest of his chair, and just breathing. Then she straightened up, checked her clipboard, and walked back to the elevators. The company hired a private security guard to sit at the entrance of our floor for the next week. Jensen was a wreck. He stopped eating lunch in the break room. He stopped staying past 5 p.m. He started taking different routes home. The following Wednesday, around 5:45 p.m., I was finishing up a report. Most of the floor was dark. The security guard had stepped away for a bathroom break. I heard the faint sound of a door clicking shut at the far end of the hallway, near the supply closet. I stood up and looked over the cubicle wall. I didn't see anyone. But as I walked toward the exit, I saw a person sitting in the dark in the very last cubicle, an empty one we use for temp workers. They were wearing a dark blue courier uniform. They had a baseball cap pulled so low I couldn't see their eyes. They were just sitting there, perfectly still, staring through the glass partition toward Jensen's empty office. "Can I help you?" I asked. My voice echoed in the empty office. The person didn't move. "He left early today," the voice said. It was a woman's voice, low and raspy. "He didn't check the mail." I reached for my phone in my pocket. "The office is closed. You need to leave." The woman stood up. She wasn't carrying a package. She was carrying a small digital voice recorder. She pressed play. Through the tiny speaker, I heard Jensen's voice. "I just don't see you that way, Renee. It's not going to happen." She had recorded the conversation they'd had 3 years ago. She'd been listening to it on a loop. "He doesn't know what he wants," she said, finally looking up. Her face was thin, her skin looking sallow under the harsh emergency lights. Her eyes were wide, darting around the room as if she were looking for hidden cameras. I've been in his house. I've seen the way he sleeps. He's lonely. He's waiting for me. I didn't argue. I didn't try to be a hero. I backed away toward the main lobby and hit the emergency alarm button next to the elevators. The shrill, piercing siren filled the floor. The woman didn't run. She didn't look panicked. She just sat back down in the temp chair, folded her hands in her lap, and stared back at Jensen's door. The police arrived about 6 minutes later. They found her exactly like that. She didn't resist when they handcuffed her. She didn't say a word to the officers. But as they were leading her past me toward the elevators, she stopped. She leaned toward me, her breath smelling like stale coffee and peppermint. "Tell him the back window is still loose," she whispered. "The latch doesn't catch if you pull it from the bottom." They took her away, and Jensen got a permanent restraining order. He ended up selling his house and moving across the state a month later. He didn't even give the office his new address. He just resigned via email and vanished. I still work on the 4th floor. Every now and then, around 5:30 p.m., the elevators will chime, and the doors will slide open to an empty lobby. I'll look up from my monitor, expecting to see a yellow vest or a blue courier uniform. Yesterday, I went to the supply closet to get a new pack of pens. Tucked into the very back of the shelf, behind a stack of printer paper, I found a small handheld digital recorder. I picked it up and hit the play button. It wasn't a recording of Jensen from 3 years ago. It was a recording of me from 10 minutes prior, humming to myself while I worked at my desk. The audio was crystal clear, like the microphone had been hidden right under my chin. I looked at the ceiling tiles above the closet, but there was nothing there but the hum of the ventilation. I left the recorder on the shelf, grabbed my bag, walked out of there as fast as I could, and went to my car.
If you like these stories and want to see more, please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing this video. It helps us a lot. If you would like to submit your story, check the email in the description. Thank you for watching.